Welcome, bienvenidos. Let's talk about the 80s, shall we? I was scrolling through Twitter and I saw a post from an account called Modern History. 1980s girls, not fat, not covered in tattoos, no phones. What happened? Now, this really bothers me for two reasons. Number one, a lot of people of my age group seem to have either glorified or minimized what it was like to live in the 80s, or a lot of people that did not live in the 80s seem to have opinions about the 80s based on, I can't tell you if it was movies, TV, or maybe their parents' accounts of what happened in the 80s. And it's like they lived in a completely different planet than I did. For the purposes of this video, just so you understand, from 1980 to 1987, I lived in Puerto Rico, but from 87 to 90 something, I lived in the United States. So I have both perspectives of both areas, okay? But because Puerto Ricans always like to imitate, we always like to imitate the worst parts of being an American, I have a lot of, and not only that, but also at that point it took a minute. In the 1980s is when cable TV went from being just something that you could watch if you lived in San Juan to something that you could watch in other towns. By the time I left my hometown, which is called Dorado, and it's a little bit away, it's about 20 miles away from San Juan, we had cable and we had HBO and we had everything like that. We didn't have that when we moved to Dorado, which is the town in question. And it was interesting to see how it kept moving all across the island. So I do remember that even though we had always been influenced, we were always influenced by the United States based on the movies, and of course the shows would be translated from English to Spanish, but it was still American shows. Now it was different because you were actually seeing the shows in English. But there's a couple of things that I want to say about this image, and yes, I keep looking because that's where the image is. But let's start with the fact that this person said not fat. I was 120 pounds in the 80s, and I was this big and I had a huge butt, which is kind of funny when you go to the 90s and the 2000s where first J-Lo and then Kim Kardashian made having a big butt a thing. But when I was a teenager, having a big butt was a bad thing. Having boobs was great, but having a big butt, and I didn't have boobs, I had a big butt. So I didn't use drugs that would get me in trouble, but I did take a lot of diet pills. I walked everywhere, and it didn't dawn on me at the time that what I was doing was making those muscles firmer, which made the butt bigger. It's a long story. I used to ride bikes, which again, same thing. And I used to do all kinds of exercises trying to get rid of my behind. None of them worked because none of them were doing what I thought they were doing. I stopped eating, technically speaking. And yes, if you're thinking this is where I'm going, yes, that's exactly where I'm going. I was 120 pounds from the time I was 14 years old until the day I got married. I'm lying. I was 122 the day I got married. So yes, I was skinny the whole time. Was I the only skinny person? No. I had friends. I had a lot of friends that would be considered to be overweight. Now it would be a completely different animal. And by the way, I was 120 pounds. I was 5'3". My waist was a size 20, and I was a size 8, 9 in clothing. And yes, uniform sizing systems no longer exist. They existed back in those days, and 8, 9 was not what it is today. Let's take for a second the not fat thing out of the way. There was a lot of pressure for girls to be skinny. There was, of course, the supermodels. That was the era of the supermodels. And we all admired the same girls. Twiggy was in the 70s. The 80s girls were Linda Evangelista, Naomi Campbell, Cindy Crawford, just to name a few. And they were very skinny and very tall. And the thing about it is that in your brain, being tall was not what made them skinny. You just felt like you needed to be skinny like they were. That messes up with your head. There was a huge problem with people doing the craziest things in order to stay skinny. And yes, there was a huge backlash in terms of how many girls were going through EDs in order to stay skinny. And that is a reality of life. So the fact that they were not fat is not because we were healthy. If you go online and talk to anybody from the 80s, they would tell you that was what they would call the Coke body, because girls would do anything to stay that skinny. Now let's go to the second thing, not covered in tattoos. Back in that age, back in the 80s, if you had one tattoo, not even covered, one tattoo, and you were a girl, you were considered to be either problematic or loose. And if you know what I mean by loose, you know what I mean by loose. Nobody with a good reputation had a tattoo. It was frowned upon to go and look for work with a tattoo. You would not even get hired. You wouldn't even be considered. It didn't matter if you had the best grades and you had the best skills and talents. If you had a tattoo, they wouldn't even look at you. It is what it is. Men could wear tattoos, especially if they were in the military or if they were in certain careers. But to be honest with you, if they wanted to work in an office, they couldn't have tattoos either. That was not a thing that was considered good for the company. I am not justifying it, and I'm not telling you that I agree with you. I'm telling you the way it used to be, okay? It says no phones. The reason why we didn't have cell phones, I mean, you didn't see the phone thing, but I lived it. I could very easily spend 5-6 hours talking to my friends on the phone a day after spending 5-6 hours with them in school. And because I lived in Dorado and not in San Juan, the phone bills in my house were ridiculous. When I was dating my husband in 1987 and he decided to join the military, and we would call each other, he would be first he was in Great Lakes and then he was in Maryland. Well, Camp Lejeune and then Maryland. The phone bills were $200 and $300 a month because I was talking to him any chance I got. You had this thing called collect calls where people will go ahead and say, yes, this is so-and-so from such and such. Do you accept the charges? And you go ahead and say yes and proceed to pay up the wazoo, because now you're not just outside of the metropolitan area or in your hometown. You're calling the United States. Those bills were $200, $300 a month. So no, we didn't have phones. We were not, and that's another thing. We were actually talking to each other. We were not texting. So there was an ability to have a better communication because you were actually talking and you could review situations in real time. It was not like if the person doesn't answer you until the next day, maybe they get upset or whatever. No, you would fix the issue right then and there. But yeah, we spent 4 or 5 hours on the phone every day. Glorifying an era because you see all these blonde girls smiling in the camera does not tell you anything about real life at that time. We as girls and eventually women grew up thinking that if we didn't look like the supermodels in the magazines, we were going to be in trouble. Ironically, the supermodels were having the same problems, because if they didn't fit a certain standard, they would get eliminated or they would lose a contract. But we didn't know that at the time. All we knew is that they were always pretty, they were always smiling, they were always gorgeous. They had this entire equipment of people making them look pretty. And of course, eventually they had Photoshop to help them. But we always saw, and the only thing we saw was all these amazing women just parading. So the idea that the models could not change their looks because it would impact their sales were ridiculous. But these men wanted to force us into a particular image, and this picture is the perfect example. I don't know how happy these girls really are. I don't know anything about this from looking at those pictures except for the fact that they're very skinny. None of them have abs of steel, so I don't know about being skinny, because in my day, that was fat because they had a pot belly. I am not saying they're fat. I think they're gorgeous, but that is what we were told to believe. You couldn't even have an ounce of fat. So please stop glorifying the old days as better. Every age has something beautiful, and we should go for that instead of just trying to pin one decade against another. Before I go, I forgot to mention one thing. If you are interested in supporting the channel, you can always go to the link tree below. You can also support us by joining our Patreon. Am I going to make a subscriber here on YouTube? I don't know. I might. Have a wonderful day.